Look, I don't know who this desk jockey is, but this is the grinder. This is where men are made. We don't have time for some diversity hire from Annapolis to come down here and check a box for her fitness report. The crowd of SEAL candidates, all muscle and sun-scorched confidence, snickered. They stood in the oppressive heat of Naval Amphibious Base Coronado, the air thick with the smell of salt, sweat, and diesel fuel. Before them, Cadet Captain Blake Renner, the golden boy of his BUD/S class, gestured with a dismissive wave toward the woman standing alone by the obstacle course. She was of average height, with a wiry frame that seemed almost frail next to the chiseled physiques surrounding her. Her uniform was crisp but unremarkable, her dark hair pulled back in a severe regulation bun. She didn't react. Her gaze was fixed on the towering structure of ropes and logs, her expression as still and placid as the deep ocean. But the base commander, Captain Elias Vance, watching from a shaded porch of the command building, saw something else. He saw the way she stood, not at ease, but in a state of relaxed readiness, her weight perfectly centered. He saw the subtle, almost imperceptible way her eyes tracked the movement of the wind through the eucalyptus trees, cataloging information. He saw the quiet that wasn't born of meekness, but of immense, coiled potential. If you believe that true strength doesn't need to announce itself, type competence below. For those cadets, she was an intrusion, a bureaucratic formality in their sacred space of pain and purification. To Renner, she was a symbol of everything he resented, the perceived lowering of standards, the political correctness he believed was weakening the warrior class he so desperately wanted to join. He was the product of a long line of naval officers, a legacy forged in the crucible of combat, and he saw himself as the rightful heir to that tradition. This woman, with her placid demeanor and lack of overt physicality, was an affront to that legacy. He needed to make an example of her, to assert the natural order of this place. He strode closer, his voice booming across the asphalt, designed for maximum humiliation. "Ma'am," he began, dripping sarcasm into the honorific. "With all due respect, you might want to stand back. Sometimes the splinters from the logs fly pretty far. Wouldn't want you to break a nail before your next PowerPoint presentation." More laughter, louder this time. The woman, Lieutenant Commander Anya Sharma, finally turned her head. Her eyes, a deep, unreadable brown, met his. There was no anger, no fear, no indignation. There was nothing. It was like looking into a deep well. For a fraction of a second, Renner felt a disquieting chill, a flicker of doubt that he quickly extinguished with another surge of arrogance. He mistook her silence for weakness, her calm for cowardice. It was a profound, catastrophic miscalculation, the kind that gets men killed in the field and legends born on the training ground. She simply gave a slow, deliberate nod, a gesture of acknowledgement so devoid of emotion, it was more unsettling than any retort could have been. Then she turned her attention back to the course, her focus absolute, as if he and his chorus of followers had ceased to exist entirely. This dismissal, so complete and effortless, infuriated him more than any verbal challenge. He had tried to put her in her place, and she had responded by simply refusing to acknowledge that such a place existed for her. The heat of the day seemed to intensify. The laughter died into an uneasy quiet, and the stage was set for a lesson that would be seared into the institutional memory of the Navy SEALs for generations to come. The tension was a living thing, a predator stalking the edges of the sun-baked compound, and it was waiting for its moment to strike. The silence that followed Renner's outburst was heavy, punctuated only by the distant cry of gulls and the rhythmic crashing of waves against the silver strand. The other candidates shuffled their feet, their earlier bravado evaporating under the weight of the lieutenant commander's unnerving composure. They had expected a confrontation, a protest, perhaps even tears. They were prepared for a fight, but they were utterly disarmed by a peace that seemed to emanate from her like a physical force field. She did not engage, she did not defend, she simply was. Sharma walked over to a nearby equipment bench and picked up a standard-issue M4 carbine. Her movements were fluid, economical, devoid of any wasted motion. There was a practiced grace in the way her hands moved over the weapon, not the hesitant touch of a staff officer, but the intimate familiarity of a master craftsman with their chosen tool. She checked the chamber, seated the magazine, and tested the charging handle with a series of clicks and snaps that were as precise and rhythmic as a surgeon's scalpel. Renner watched, a sneer still plastered on his face, but a seed of uncertainty had been planted in the fertile ground of his ego. He had built his identity on a foundation of physical dominance and aggressive confidence. He was the fastest runner, the strongest swimmer, the best shot in his class. He led through intimidation and volume, believing that leadership was a performance. Sharma's quiet professionalism was a language he didn't speak and, therefore, couldn't comprehend. He decided to double down, to mistake her diligence for obsessive, nervous behavior. "Getting in some practice, ma'am?" he called out, his voice a little too loud, betraying the crack in his own confidence. "Don't worry. We'll leave the paper targets up for you." The moving ones could be a bit tricky. A few of his closest sycophants managed a weak chuckle, but the heart had gone out of the mockery. They were all watching her hands. They were watching the way she adjusted the sling, not with a clumsy fumbling, but with a single, smooth pull, setting it to a perfect length for her frame. They saw the way her gaze swept the area, not as a tourist, but as an operator assessing fields of fire, points of entry, and potential threats. These were the subtle tells, the unconscious choreography of the truly elite, invisible to the uninitiated but screamingly obvious to anyone who had spent even a moment in the presence of a genuine Tier 1 asset. Captain Vance, still observing from his perch, leaned forward slightly. He recognized the pattern. It was the same methodical ritual he had seen in the staging areas of Fallujah, in the dusty FOBs of Afghanistan, in the humid jungles of the Philippines. It was the calm before the storm, the deadly focus of a professional preparing for work. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that these cadets were not watching a bureaucrat. They were watching a predator. Sharma ignored Renner's second taunt as completely as she had the first. She slung the rifle over her shoulder, where it settled as if it were a part of her own body. She then walked toward the entrance of the kill house, a state-of-the-art training facility designed to simulate close-quarters battle. Its maze of rooms and hallways was a brutal teacher, unforgiving of hesitation or error. It was where the best of the best came to hone the lethal art of room clearing. Renner and his team were scheduled for a graded run, the culmination of weeks of grueling training. Their performance today would be a major factor in whether they would move on to the next phase of training or be washed out of the program. The pressure was immense, and Renner's public peacocking was his way of masking his own anxiety. He saw Sharma's presence as a bad omen, a distraction. He didn't realize she was the lesson. The interior of the kill house was a labyrinth of stark concrete walls and steel doors, reeking of gunpowder and stale air. A network of cameras and sensors tracked every movement, broadcasting the action to the control room, where instructors and observers could watch on a bank of monitors. Captain Vance had moved from the porch to the observation deck, his face a grim mask of concentration as he watched the screens. Renner and his 5-man team, designated Bravo 1, stacked up outside the first door. Their movements were jerky, overly aggressive, a stark contrast to the fluid economy Sharma had displayed. They were playing the part of commandos, their gear rattling, their whispered commands too loud. Renner, as team leader, gave the signal. A breacher set a small charge on the door, and with a deafening crack, it blew inwards. The team poured into the room, a chaotic flood of bodies and weapons. The plan, rehearsed 100 times, fell apart in seconds. They failed to clear their corners. 2 men went for the same target, their fields of fire dangerously overlapping. Renner, caught up in the adrenaline, moved too fast, outpacing his teammates and leaving his flank exposed. On the monitors, red lights flashed over the heads of 2 of his men, indicating they had been killed by pop-up targets they had failed to engage. In the next room, a hostage target, a mannequin with a crudely painted smile, was riddled with simulated rounds during a sloppy exchange of fire. The instructor's voice, a gravelly monotone, crackled over the comms. Bravo 1, you've lost 2 men and killed a hostage. Reset and run it again. Humiliation burned in Renner's chest. He barked orders at his team, his voice tight with anger, placing blame on everyone but himself. They ran the simulation again, and their performance was even worse. Their movements were now hesitant, their communication frayed. They were thinking instead of acting, their instincts clouded by the fear of failure. After a third disastrous attempt, the instructor's voice cut through the noise with cold finality. Bravo 1, you're done. Exit the structure. Your assessment is a catastrophic failure. The team trudged out into the harsh sunlight, their heads hanging, the weight of their failure palpable. Renner's face was a thunderous mask of fury and shame. And standing there, by the exit, was Lieutenant Commander Sharma. She was holding a shock pad, a device used to simulate the disorienting effects of a flashbang grenade, and her expression was unchanged. The lead instructor, a grizzled Master Chief named Cutler, walked over to Captain Vance. Sir, they're not ready. Their fundamentals are sloppy, and their team leader is a liability. He's all ego. Vance just nodded, his eyes on Sharma. Master Chief, Vance said, his voice low but carrying an unmistakable command. Clear the course. Reset the scenario to the Nightmare Protocol. Maximum complexity, randomized hostiles, multiple hostages. Cutler's eyebrows shot up. The Nightmare Protocol was a brutal, unwinnable scenario designed to break even the most seasoned SEAL teams. Sir? For who? Vance's gaze never left Sharma. For the lieutenant commander. She will run it. Alone. A murmur went through the assembled cadets. Alone? It was impossible. Suicidal. Renner let out a short, incredulous laugh. Sir, with respect, she'll be a casualty in the first 10 seconds. This is a joke. Vance turned his head slowly and pinned Renner with a glare that could strip paint. Cadet, you have failed to lead, you have failed to listen, and you have failed to learn. Your final lesson for the day is to stand here, be silent, and watch a professional work. The authority in his voice was absolute. Renner's mouth snapped shut. Sharma, who had overheard the exchange, simply unslung her rifle and gave the Master Chief a crisp nod. Ready when you are. Master Chief. There was no bravado, no hesitation. It was the calm, declarative statement of someone about to perform a task for which they were supremely, almost unnaturally, qualified. The cadets, Renner included, now watched in a state of stunned, apprehensive silence. The joke was over. The air crackled with the terrifying possibility that they had made a mistake of epic proportions. The heavy steel door of the kill house clanged shut behind Sharma, plunging her into the dim, artificial light of the simulated environment. Outside, the cadets gathered around the large monitors, their earlier arrogance replaced by a tense, almost fearful curiosity. Renner stood at the front, his arms crossed, his jaw tight. He was poised for failure, ready to be vindicated, yet a part of him felt a creeping dread. On the screen, Sharma's icon, a single green dot, was a solitary beacon in a sea of red triangles representing hostile targets. The Nightmare Protocol was active. The layout was randomized. The targets were programmed with unpredictable movement patterns, and friendly hostage targets were interspersed with the enemy. It was a symphony of chaos, and she was the lone conductor. Sharma did not move for a full 10 seconds. The cadets fidgeted, whispering amongst themselves. "What's she doing?" one muttered. "She's frozen," another replied, a hint of satisfaction in his voice. But Captain Vance and Master Chief Cutler knew exactly what she was doing. She was listening. She was feeling the vibrations in the floor, sensing the airflow from the ventilation systems, building a three-dimensional map of the structure in her mind. Her stillness was not hesitation. It was a process of total sensory immersion. Then she moved. It wasn't the frantic, crashing entry of Renner's team. It was a silent, deliberate flow, more like a predator stalking its prey than a soldier clearing a building. She didn't breach the first door. She tested it, found it unlocked, and slipped through the gap with the fluid grace of a shadow. The first room was an L shape, a classic ambush point. Renner's team had charged in and been cut down from the blind corner. Sharma paused at the threshold, using the polished surface of her combat knife as a makeshift mirror to scan the room's interior. She processed the layout in a fraction of a second. A hostile target was positioned deep in the corner. She didn't charge. Instead, she tossed a spent magazine across the room. The target, programmed to react to sound, swiveled its weapon towards the noise. In that instant, Sharma was through the door. 2 rounds, a perfect double tap to the head, and the target's light went from red to black. The entire engagement took less than 2 seconds and was executed in near-perfect silence. On the observation deck, a collective gasp went through the cadets. Renner felt his blood run cold. It was a level of tactical elegance he had only read about in textbooks. Sharma continued her relentless, silent advance. She flowed from room to room, a ghost in the machine. She didn't just clear spaces, she dominated them. She used angles and shadows with an artist's mastery. A hostile popped out from behind a doorway. It was neutralized before its own weapon was fully raised. 2 targets in a hallway, one behind the other. She fired a single round, a collateral shot, that passed through the first target's center mass and struck the second. Impossible. Cutler, a man who had seen everything in his 30 years of service, let out a low whistle. She's not just running the course, he breathed. She's hunting. The final room was the most complex. 3 hostiles, 2 hostages, and a booby-trapped entrance. Renner's team had been wiped out here on their 3rd run. The door was wired to a flashbang simulator. Sharma didn't try to open it. She used a small fiber-optic scope, snaking it under the door to map the room. She located the trigger wire. Then, with the delicate precision of a surgeon, she used the tip of her knife to sever it through the tiny gap. She entered the room low and fast. 3 targets, different angles, all with clear shots of the hostages. The cadets watched, holding their breath, as 3 sets of double taps echoed in the kill house in a seamless, rhythmic burst. Pop-pop, pop-pop, pop-pop. On the screen, the final 3 red triangles vanished. The green dust stood alone, surrounded by the ghosts of her conquests. The entire run, the nightmare protocol that had utterly broken a 5-man team of promising SEAL candidates, had taken her 94 seconds. A profound, deafening silence descended upon the observation deck. The only sound was the hum of the monitors. Renner stared at the screen, his mouth agape. The image of that lone green dot, so calm and so utterly lethal, had shattered his entire conception of strength, skill, and superiority. He saw his own performance for what it was, a clumsy, loud, and pathetic imitation of the warrior he pretended to be. He was a child playing with his father's gun. He had just watched the gun itself come alive. The door to the kill house opened, and Sharma stepped out into the blinding sun. She blinked once, her breathing even, her uniform barely disturbed. She slung the rifle and walked calmly towards the instructors, her face betraying no hint of exertion or triumph. She had simply gone to work. Captain Elias Vance let the silence hang in the air for a long moment, allowing the full weight of what the cadets had just witnessed to settle over them. He watched their faces, saw the mixture of awe, shock, and dawning shame. He saw Renner, his face pale, his cocky bravado completely stripped away, leaving behind the raw, humbled core of a young man who had just come face to face with a truth far beyond his understanding. Vance walked from the observation deck down to the training ground, his boots crunching on the gravel with deliberate, authoritative steps. He stopped directly in front of the assembled class, his presence commanding immediate and absolute attention. Master Chief Cutler followed, carrying a small, ruggedized tablet. Vance's eyes, weathered by years of command in the world's most dangerous places, swept over the young man. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. His quiet intensity was more powerful than any shout. For the past 12 weeks, he began, his voice a low baritone that cut through the afternoon heat. You have been told that you are the best, that you are stronger, faster, and more resilient than any other warfighter on the planet. You have started to believe that the title you seek, the Trident, is a mark of inherent superiority. Today, you learn that you are wrong. You learn that assumptions are the enemy of survival, and arrogance is a disease that will get you and your entire team killed. He paused, letting the words sink in. He then turned his gaze to Lieutenant Commander Sharma, who stood at ease, her expression still neutral. Gentlemen, you have been asking who this desk jockey is. You have been wondering what a diversity hire is doing on this base. I think it's time for a proper introduction. He nodded to Master Chief Cutler. Cutler tapped the screen of the tablet, and the image was projected onto the large display screens on the observation deck, the same screens that had just shown Sharma's flawless run. A personnel file appeared. The name read, Sharma, ANYA, Lieutenant Commander, United States Navy. The cadets stared, their confusion mounting. This told them nothing. Then, Cutler swiped to the next screen. It was a list of qualifications and service history. The silence was broken by a series of sharp, involuntary intakes of breath. The first line read, Unit Assignment, Naval Special Warfare Development Group, DEVGRU. A tremor went through the crowd. DEVGRU, the official designation for SEAL Team 6, the most elite, secretive, and lethal fighting force in the U.S. military. An organization so revered it was spoken of only in hushed, mythic tones. They were not just SEALs. They were the men who hunted the architects of terror in the darkest corners of the globe. And standing before them was one of them. Vance's voice continued, a calm, steady narration of the impossible. Lieutenant Commander Sharma has over a decade of operational experience with the group. She is a lead instructor in advanced close-quarters combat and hostage rescue. The very techniques your instructors have been trying to teach you, she wrote the manual. Literally, he let that statement settle before continuing. She is a master breacher, an expert in explosive ordnance disposal, and a qualified combat medic. Her file contains commendations for actions in environments so hostile, their names remain classified. Cutler swiped the screen again. A list of medals and citations appeared. Navy Cross, Silver Star with 3 oak leaf clusters, Bronze Star with Valor, Purple Heart. The list went on. Each medal was a story of unimaginable heroism, of violence, and of sacrifice. The cadets, who dreamed of one day earning even a single one of those awards, were looking at a living legend. They had mocked a hero. They had dismissed a giant of their own profession because she didn't fit their narrow, prejudiced image of what a warrior should look like. The final screen on the display held a single, grainy satellite photo. It showed a desert compound at night, illuminated by the ghostly green glow of night vision. 6 years ago, Captain Vance said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, filled with a deep, personal reverence. A high-value target was barricaded in a fortified structure, surrounded by over 30 heavily armed fighters. He was using a captured CIA officer as a human shield. The situation was deemed impossible. A direct assault was considered suicidal. He paused, his eyes finding Renner in the crowd. The assault was led by a 2-person sniper observer team that infiltrated the perimeter alone. They eliminated the exterior guards from a distance of over 1,000 meters in complete darkness. Then, when the breach team was pinned down, one member of that sniper team charged the building solo. They neutralized the remaining hostiles and rescued the hostage. The individual who made that run was a young lieutenant. Her call sign was Ghost. Vance turned and faced Sharma directly. For the first time, his stern, commander's facade softened, replaced by an expression of profound and absolute respect. He drew himself up to his full height, his back ramrod straight, and executed the sharpest, most formal salute of his long and distinguished career. It was not the salute of a superior officer to a subordinate. It was the salute of one warrior to another, an acknowledgement of a skill and courage that transcended rank. Lieutenant Commander Sharma, he said, his voice ringing with clarity and conviction. Mom, it is an honor to have you at this command. Sharma met his gaze and returned the salute with a simple, clean gesture. Thank you, Captain, she replied, her voice quiet but clear. The cadets stood frozen, their minds reeling. The sheer scale of their ignorance was crushing. Renner felt a wave of nausea. The splinters, the PowerPoint presentations, the broken nails, his every insult was now a burning coal of shame in his gut. He had stood on the shoulders of giants and, in his blindness, had tried to knock one down. The truth of the situation settled over them all. They were not in the presence of a woman who was trying to be like them. They were in the presence of a woman they could only dream of one day becoming. Vance lowered his salute and turned back to the stunned class. "Your training today is over," he announced. "Your homework is to reflect on what you saw here. Reflect on your assumptions. Reflect on your definition of strength. If you cannot learn this lesson, the most important lesson you will ever receive, then you do not deserve to wear the trident. You are dismissed." The cadets broke apart slowly, not with their usual boisterous energy, but with the somber, shuffling gait of humbled men. They avoided eye contact with each other, each one lost in his own private sea of introspection and regret. They had come to the grinder to be broken physically, to be tested to their limits. They had not expected their spirits, their very identities, to be so completely and utterly dismantled by 94 seconds of quiet, undeniable competence. The legend of the Ghost of Coronado was born in that moment, in the silence of their collective shame and newfound respect. The story of Lieutenant Commander Sharma's 94-second run through the Nightmare Protocol spread through the naval base like a shockwave. It began as hushed whispers in the barracks that night, the cadets recounting the events with a sense of religious awe. They described her movement not as walking or running, but as flowing. They spoke of the rhythmic sound of the double taps as a kind of deadly music. By morning, the story had reached the mess halls, where sailors and Marines from every command on the base listened with rapt attention. The details became mythic in the retelling. The 94-second runtime was rounded down to an even 90. The number of hostiles grew from a dozen to 20. Some versions claimed she had done it blindfolded. Others swore she had cleared the entire house with only a handgun. The facts were no longer important. What mattered was the truth the story represented, that the most dangerous person in a room is often the one you notice least. The legend solidified when Master Chief Cutler, a man known for his stoicism and economy of words, was asked about the incident by a group of young ensigns. He simply took a nondescript, black-painted target from the kill house, the very first one Sharma had engaged, and pinned it to the main bulletin board in the training facility's ready room. There were 2 holes in the head of the silhouette, perfectly spaced, so close together they could be covered by a quarter. Beneath it, he taped a small, handwritten label, "The Ghost, 18 seconds." It became a shrine. Cadets, instructors, and even seasoned operators would stop by to look at it, to touch the clean, precise holes in the paper, and to reflect on the meaning of true mastery. The target was a tangible symbol of a lesson that had been brutally but necessarily taught. It was a permanent reminder that professionalism is quiet, ego is loud, and the difference between the two is the difference between life and death. The story even permeated the digital world. Anonymous posts began appearing on military forums and Reddit threads, telling a sanitized version of the tale. They spoke of a female instructor at BUD/S who humbled an entire class of alpha dogs. The post went viral, shared among service members and veterans around the world. They resonated because everyone in that culture knew a Blake Renner, arrogant, loud, and blinded by prejudice. And everyone dreamed of seeing that arrogance shattered by the quiet, irrefutable power of competence. Sharma, for her part, remained completely unaffected by her newfound legendary status. She showed up for duty the next day at the same time, in the same crisp uniform, with the same placid expression. She deflected all questions and praise with a simple, "I was just doing my job." Her focus was not on her reputation, but on her mission, to forge the next generation of special operators. She saw the flaw in Renner and his classmates not as a personal insult, but as a dangerous vulnerability in the operational readiness of the teams. Her demonstration had not been an act of vengeance. It had been a necessary, if severe, course correction. She began working with the struggling teams, her teaching style as economical and precise as her movements. She rarely spoke. Instead, she would demonstrate a technique, a way to hold a rifle, a method for clearing a corner, a nonverbal communication signal, and have the cadets replicate it until it was perfect. Her silence compelled them to watch, to focus, to internalize the lessons in a way no lecture ever could. They learned more from her quiet presence in a week than they had from Renner's loud leadership in 3 months. The most profound transformation, however, took place within Cadet Captain Blake Renner. The events of that day had not just humbled him. They had fundamentally broken him. His entire identity, built on a carefully constructed edifice of legacy, physical prowess, and aggressive certainty, had been demolished. He spent the night after the incident not sleeping, but replaying those 94 seconds over and over in his mind. He saw her fluid grace, her impossible speed, her absolute calm. He contrasted it with his own clumsy, chaotic performance. The comparison was so stark, so damning, that it left no room for excuses. He had been a fool, and his foolishness had been exposed in the most public and undeniable way possible. The next morning, he knew what he had to do. It was the hardest thing he had ever done, harder than Hell Week, harder than any physical evolution. He found Lieutenant Commander Sharma as she was calibrating the sights on a rifle at the firing range. The other cadets who were present fell silent, sensing the gravity of the moment. Renner walked up to her, stopped a respectful 5 feet away, and stood at attention. "Ma'am," he began, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. He cleared his throat and started again, his words now clear and steady. "Ma'am, I have no excuse for my behavior yesterday. My comments were unprofessional, disrespectful, and born of an arrogance that I now see was nothing more than a cover for my own insecurity. I judged you based on ignorance and prejudice, and in doing so, I not only dishonored you, but I dishonored this uniform and the institution we both serve. What you did yesterday, it was the single greatest display of skill and professionalism I have ever witnessed. You have taught me a lesson about what it truly means to be a warrior, and it's a lesson I will carry with me for the rest of my life. I am profoundly sorry." He stood there, his apology hanging in the air, awaiting her judgment. He was prepared for a reprimand, a dressing down, or even to be dismissed entirely. Sharma finished her adjustment on the rifle sight, giving it one last, satisfying click. She then turned to him. She looked him in the eye for a long moment, her gaze as intense and analytical as it had been in the kill house. He felt as if she were scanning his very soul, assessing the sincerity of his words. Then she gave him the same, simple, non-committal nod she had given him the day before. But this time it meant something different. It was not a dismissal. It was an acceptance. She then said 2 words. "Get ready." She gestured to the firing lane next to hers. Renner, confused but obedient, picked up a rifle and took his position. For the next hour, Sharma stood beside him, not as a superior officer or a legend, but as a teacher. She didn't speak. She would simply reach over and adjust his grip, tap his elbow to correct his stance, or tilt his head to align his eye with the sight. They were small, precise movements, each one correcting a tiny flaw he never knew he had. It was a form of communication more intimate and effective than any lecture. In that hour of shared silence and subtle correction, Renner understood. Forgiveness wasn't a speech, it was an act of mentorship. Respect wasn't given, it was demonstrated. And true strength wasn't about being the loudest voice in the room. It was about being the steadiest hand. He had been knocked down, but in her quiet, professional way, she was now showing him how to get back up, stronger and wiser than before. The lesson was complete. Months later, the culture at the Naval Special Warfare Center had subtly but irrevocably shifted. The story of the ghost of Coronado had become a foundational piece of institutional folklore, a cautionary tale told to every new class of BUD/S candidates on their first day. The target with the 2 perfect holes remained on the bulletin board, now encased in protective glass. A permanent relic of the day arrogance was silenced by competence. Blake Renner had graduated, but he was a changed man. The brash, loudmouthed cadet was gone, replaced by a quiet, focused junior officer who led not by shouting, but by example. He finished at the top of his class, not because of his raw talent, which had always been there, but because he had finally learned the humility necessary to refine it. He was often assigned to mentor struggling candidates, and his first lesson was always the same. He would take them to the ready room, point to the target in the glass case, and tell them the story of Lieutenant Commander Sharma. He would tell it from his own perspective, never shying away from the humiliating details of his own failure. I thought strength was about how much you could lift or how fast you could run, he would tell the new recruits, his voice filled with the conviction of a true convert. I thought it was about being the alpha, the loudest man in the room. I was wrong. Strength is control. It's precision. It's the ability to be calm when everyone else is panicking. It's the confidence to be silent because your actions will speak for you. The most formidable people you will ever meet will not be the ones who tell you how great they are. They will be the ones who never have to. The impact of Sharma's presence rippled outwards. Instructors reevaluated their teaching methods, placing a greater emphasis on precision and tactical patience over brute force and aggression. The selection process began to look for different markers in candidates, not just physical resilience, but mental fortitude, emotional control, and the capacity for quiet, critical thought. The Renner incident, as it came to be known, became a case study in leadership and the dangers of institutional bias. It forced a generation of warfighters to confront their own prejudices about what a hero, a leader, and a SEAL operator looked like. Sharma herself eventually rotated to a new, classified assignment, disappearing back into the shadowy world from which she had emerged. She left without fanfare or a farewell ceremony. Her departure as quiet and unassuming as her arrival. She left behind no statues, no plaques with her name on them. But her legacy was far more potent and enduring. It was etched into the mindset of every operator who trained at Coronado. It lived in the story told by a reformed officer. It was present in the hushed reverence in the ready room. Her legacy was a standard. It was a silent, powerful expectation of professionalism that now permeated the air of that sacred training ground. She had proven that a single individual, armed with nothing but undeniable competence and profound humility, could change the culture of an entire institution. True legacy is not found in the stories told about you, but in the standards that are upheld long after you are gone. It is not a monument of stone, but a foundation of principles upon which others can build. Anya Sharma had not sought fame or recognition. She had sought excellence, both in herself and in those she was charged to lead. Her triumph was not in proving Blake Renner wrong. It was in making him better. She understood that the purpose of strength is not to dominate, but to elevate. The quiet professional knows that respect is the natural consequence of demonstrated competence, not the goal of it. It is the echo that follows a well-executed action, not the noise made to announce its arrival. In a world that increasingly confuses volume with value and certainty with correctness, the path of the quiet professional is a more difficult, but ultimately more meaningful one. It requires the discipline to let your work speak for itself, the humility to learn from anyone, and the unshakable confidence that comes not from external validation, but from internal mastery. The cadets at Coronado learned that the most important muscle a warrior can train is not in their arms or their legs, but in their mind, the one that controls the ego, silences the noise, and allows for absolute focus on the mission at hand. They learned that the crest of the Navy SEALs, the trident, was not a crown to be worn, but a tool to be wielded with precision, humility, and a quiet, deadly competence. The legend of the Ghost became a part of the curriculum, a living piece of their history that taught a timeless lesson. It reminded them that in the crucible of combat, on the knife's edge between life and death, your assumptions can kill you. Your ego can kill you. Your prejudice can kill you. But your skill, honed in silence and executed with calm precision, will keep you and your brothers alive. The story serves as a permanent, powerful reminder that you must never, ever underestimate the quiet ones. For they are the ones who have mastered the art of listening, the discipline of observation, and the craft of turning silence itself into an unbreakable weapon. For more stories where quiet competence triumphs over loud arrogance, and where character defines their worth, subscribe to Unknown Heroine Stories.